hasn't been so long ago that being gay was criminalized. People were put in jail in the United States for being gay. That's why a subculture was created.
There's nothing like being comfortable in a space that is yours.
Lesbian bars were places not just of social gathering, but of community building. People found their families.
I walked into other bars and I had a Bloody Mary. I was probably wearing an outfit similar to this. Some gentleman walked up to me and was like, "Hey, what are you, some kind of faggot?" I'm like, "I suppose I am some sort of faggot." You want to meet somebody, you want to not be harassed in a bar. It's nice to have a fucking break from it, but you look at New York, you look at San Francisco, you don't have full-time lesbian bars.
What the hell is going on with the lesbian bar scene here? There are no more lesbian bars here.
For the past 15 years, I've traveled the world, DJing and performing in bands like Le Tigre, Men, and Peaches. So much of my work has been focused on helping to create safe spaces for queer communities, and frequently, for lesbians.
This is your time, this is your life, and this is your time, this is your life, and this is your time, this is your life.
In the past few years, I've noticed a disturbing trend. Almost all the lesbian bars are shutting down. I have so many complicated feelings around the disappearance of these nostalgic spaces from my history.
I throw a party called Scissor Sunday at the Rusty Knot. Now, it started off as a lesbian party, and it's turned into something else completely.
While gay boy bars seem to be going strong, sadly, lesbian bars across the country are quickly dwindling in numbers. Major cities that once had multiple bars for lesbians to meet and create community now have none. Growing up in the suburbs of Cleveland and searching desperately for a space to feel visible as a lesbian, it was that much more exciting for me to find the lesbian bar. They brought me a sense of community and family that I hadn't found until that point, and helped me feel safe within my own identity. To try to figure out why they're all closing, I took a trip across the country in search of the last lesbian bars. I decided to start out in the gay capital of the world, San Francisco, California.
Do you know if there's any lesbian bars in San Francisco?
Not anymore.
When I first came here in 1985, I would say there were 8 lesbian bars, fixed lesbian bars, not just nightclub nights.
Yeah.
And then they gradually just went away.
The only one that was very much a lesbian bar was that of Lexington, which is no longer around.
After going from 8 lesbian bars in San Francisco to only 1, the iconic Lexington Club in the Mission District was the very last to close in April of 2015.
So sad. We came here to say goodbye because they're shutting their doors after 18 years of service to lesbians like me.
I always felt like with the Lexington that there was a purpose of accessibility through affordability. And we always kept our drinks very affordable, and we never ever charged a cover. There's no barrier to being in here and being a part of this.
To me, it was like you created a family. Every time I was in San Francisco, I went there for a beer.
Awesome.
And it was like, that was just the plan.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a dive, but people really felt like they had a place that they could always go to and be safe, and that was really our place, our cultural place. We never closed for the holidays. We were always open. Christmas, Thanksgiving, but it's a business model that tries to target less than 5% of the population. It should not work, it's crazy. Who would say we're only gonna try to sell our wares to a small percentage of people? A lot of things have changed. Rent pretty much doubled. If half of that 5% no longer lives in your neighborhood or even your city, what am I gonna do? Be like, come over the Bay Bridge to have like one beer on your way home like you used to when you lived 2 blocks away? It's not gonna happen. Neighborhood bars have closed in San Francisco in the last 2 years, but was it on the front page of the Sunday Chronicle? No. When we lost the one lesbian bar, it was, because that's important, but that's really what's going on.
I know that the Lexington closed. I don't think there's any particular lesbian bars. There's always nights.
Yeah.
And I came to the conclusion that the lesbians are a lot more responsible than the gay men. So it's like, I don't go out all the time.
Okay. Why do you think the rest of them are closing?
Because lesbians like to pair up and get a U-Haul and get married and...
U-Haul theory, that's the stereotype about lesbian romantic coupling. You know, like lots of stereotypes, there's some truth in the U-Haul theory. Lesbians are more likely to couple pretty quickly and to see themselves in relation to a long-term commitment. Gay men are better at separating sex and love and seeing short-term sexual liaisons as how they want to live their lives.
That is the function of the bar, and they're willing to spend money to do it. Whereas that has not been the MO of lesbians. Even back in the 50s and 60s, which some people consider to be a golden age of lesbian bars, it was often community formation as much as it was about hooking up.
Gay men have many more bars than lesbians do, in part because they have access to more economic capital as a whole. They tend to live in neighborhoods where those bars are located. Lesbians have been gentrified out of a lot of those neighborhoods.
LGBT communities are very, very stratified by race and class. Affluent, middle-class, white lesbians are not spending their money going to bars. So I do think that lesbian bars have been economically shaky from the get-go. If you're doing a study of lesbian bars in any given era, you're going to see massive turnover. One day a lesbian bar is on the block and the next day it's gone.
Lesbian bars in San Francisco seem to be casualties to this city's economic boom. But that can't be the case everywhere, can it? Bars in other major cities across the country are closing too. I decided to go from the gay capital to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., home to a thriving and politically savvy LGBT community.
Do you know if there's any lesbian bars in DC?
I imagine there are.
Yeah. Do you know if there's any lesbian bars in DC?
No.
No. Excuse me. Sorry. Do you know if there's any lesbian bars in DC?
Yeah, there actually is one called Phase 1 or something like that. Yeah, man, it's a good time. I've been in there a couple times.
Cool, cool.
At least there's still one lesbian bar in DC. Phase 1 is the longest-running lesbian bar in America. That's no small feat in a city where at least 8 gay bars have closed in the past 2 years. Far from its former glory, the once packed hotspot has been recently struggling to stay afloat.
Phase is now 45 years old. I don't think of it as a bar. It's been a community center. It is a museum. It is a historical marker. I mean, the things that happen within those 4 walls are just, they're mind-blowing. I mean, when Phase, opened, there was a big clash between the military base that's located there and the gay bars. And if you go into Phase to this day, when you first walk in through the front door, there's actually a secondary, cubby hole area because people have thrown bottles, tear gas. They battled to get us to where we're at. Phase 1 has shaped so many people's lives. I mean, I struggled with coming out, but it wasn't until I came to Phase where I was like, I'm okay, I can do this. Phase 100% changed my life. It was my everything for 10 years. And I mean, there's a lot of people that do sit back and they don't appreciate it till it's gone.
I wondered if there were ways for our community to connect outside of the dying bar scene. So I went to talk to Valerie Papaya Mann, who started Sapphire Sapphos, one of the first organizations for African American lesbians, which sought to create space for arts and activism.
Sapphire Sapphos grew out of a need in the community to have spaces to meet other women, especially at that point, women of color. But what we discovered is that women had a variety of issues. Some of them didn't know how to even be in a relationship with a lesbian. So we started off sort of at a social club, but it quickly metamorphed into a club that dealt with educational workshops and community forums, as well as political organizations.
So when did Sapphire Sapphos stop working together as a group?
What happened is that people started focusing in their various individual areas of interest and concern, as opposed to just towards people who share the same sexuality.
Right.
But if we do not create spaces where we can get together and talk and feel like community, then I believe that we will all suffer. And I believe that we're already suffering as a result of it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
As we age, it's not just losing an opportunity to have somewhere to dance. It's also losing community. Everyone deserves a place that they can go and be with other people and be comfortable who are like them.
It's encouraging to know that DC has historically been committed to creating spaces for lesbians, even if to mixed results. There's no denying that these spaces are dying out in DC, but there's clearly still a need for them. I figured if there's one place I could find lesbian bars, it would be New Orleans, the party capital of America.
So here we are in New Orleans in the French Quarter on Bourbon Street, and it pretty much feels like a feminist haunted house. Cheers! Do you guys know where any lesbian bars are? They said they weren't gay stormtroopers. Do you know where any lesbian bars are? Lesbish? Lesbish. Lesbish. No?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Do you know where there's any lesbian bars?
Take a walk in my apartment.
Okay. I think what happens is they're like, oh my god, you're a lesbian, you're not a 15-year-old boy. And I'm like, watching their reaction like, this is a lesbian.
First, we headed to Tableau on Jackson Square to meet my new friend, Brenda Laura. Brenda was a bar owner for 35 years and has seen her city go from 7 lesbian bars to 0. With this alarming trend, I was concerned that lesbians didn't have defined public spaces to meet anymore.
We still have a definite problem here of people not being able to be seen, not being able to go out. Usually if we see 2 women walking down the street holding hands, we know they're not from here.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I do it, but a lot of women won't do it. We are a little bit further behind than the rest of the country. That's one of the top 10 reasons we don't have women's bars.
Have you had any makeouts on this corner?
I've had makeouts on every corner in the French Quarter.
I figured as
I've
much.
been around long enough that I've had makeouts everywhere in the city of New Orleans. This was the grog right here.
Wow.
This was the first women's bar that I remember. In the 70s, there was a bomb put in here, but it was found and disarmed. And the owners of this bar, Margie and Pino, who were icons of the community, Pino passed away in one of the nursing homes, unfortunately, after Katrina. One of the nursing homes that left the people there to die. Something's happened with the lesbian community here. They've become very separated. The older women and the younger women, we've created almost 2 separate cultures.
Wow.
And I grew up with mentors and learning about being a lesbian, about my heritage, about everything from the older women. Back then, we all mixed. You'd have a 60-year-old woman sitting next to a 20-year-old woman having a drink and talking.
An intergenerational sense of community was thriving here in New Orleans at one time, and now a new generation is looking to breathe life into the abandoned lesbian bar scene. Last Call is a collective that started in 2013, which documents the stories of those who experienced the dynamic dyke bar scene of the 1970s and 80s.
One of our main motivations in doing this project is not just to like record these stories and keep them safe over time, but to build relationships intergenerationally now. Because when we don't have a space where all ages can get together, we don't meet each other.
I think this issue is actually one of the reasons that some of the bars aren't sustainable, because each generation often rejects things from the previous generation. So when you have these generations that are kind of butting heads, they're not necessarily mingling in spaces, and the spaces die out. There are other spaces that are serving in similar functions, just not the same way. Like, there are a lot of like dance party nights that it really are catered towards lesbian identified or queer communities, and those are pretty poppin'. Like they happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in why it's the one night only situation rather than a space that's like that every night. You know what I mean?
There's so many reasons.
Yeah, there's so many reasons. I mean, I think that the ways that we interact are so different because of the internet, and the ways we can meet each other are very different. So, you know, these bars, which functioned as people's homes, it was like the place where they met everyone. You don't necessarily need that anymore. It's not the only way you're going to meet people of like minds.
The internet has made a profound change in the way that we meet each other. In my day, we met people in bars. That was where there was a critical mass of other gay people. So if you're going to a bar simply to meet sexual partners, then you know, the internet has usurped the role of the bars in many respects. But in terms of the larger function of the lesbian bar as a community gathering point, internet dating cannot replace that function.
The internet has obviously had its own impact on dating in general. More specifically for lesbians, it has redefined the need for lesbian bars in order to meet potential partners. This trip across the country made me wonder how all these varied issues played out in my own stomping grounds of New York City.
Can I ask you a question for a documentary? It'll take... Okay. Sir? Okay. Can I ask you a question? Everyone's in a hurry over here. All the time, in a hurry.
New York is well known for its history with the mafia, and for a long time, the mafia had a history with gay bars. Homosexuals were seen as an illegal community that were excluded from mainstream establishments. Mobsters saw an untapped market, so they opened gay bars, paid off cops, and watered down the booze. Lisa and Minnie are the longtime bar owners of Henrietta Hudson. They have seen New York City go from a dozen lesbian bars down to one. I knew these women could tell me more about the history of lesbian bars and the current situation in New York.
Halloween 1991, we opened Henrietta Hudson. We've been open for 23 years. For the first 2 weeks I was open, there was a black Lincoln parked outside the bar with two mobsters just staring the whole night. So I was driving home one night and they followed me down West Street. Well, I had it. I got out of my car and I knocked on their window and said, listen, I don't know what you want, but let's just get it over with. They turned around, I never saw them again.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I saw like the change from like the stone butch to the advent of the lipstick lesbian. Mm-hmm. And then it was cool and hip to be a lesbian. A lot of the young lesbians that I meet are very accepted by their families. They're very comfortable in their own skin and they come out more. I think it does affect the lesbian bar business in the sense of we have to be more creative, we have to mix it up and be multi-culti as a venue.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it has affected it, but not to the point that, you know, we're gonna turn into there's no gay bars in the world, because that would be a catastrophe.
Right.
I mean, catastrophe.
What would it be like if we lost the last lesbian bar in New York City? I met up with Avery Agony, a friend of mine who ran a queer party called Hey Queen. We reminisced about one of my favorite lesbian bars, which is now long gone, Meow Mix.
Do you miss Meow Mix?
So much. I remember one day, Linda, you remember Linda? She was that biker.
Oh,
Linda,
yeah.
the biker. Oh, she was so good to us. I remember walking down the Lower East Side and some fucking douchebags were coming by and being like, fucking dyke, you know, just like harassing us. And Linda was like, come on girls, get in here. People are fucking nuts out of here. Oh my God, you know, like Meow Mix was a place to like shield us from the big bad world of what New York City and what Manhattan used to be. I live in New York City, so I know I live in a really special place as far as like epicenters of queer culture happening, but here, what used to be dyke communities are looking really different. This is a place where there has been such a movement for gender non-conforming people, you know? That people are calling themselves queer. I totally understand what it means to have spaces where you need to heal and be with your people. But I feel really strongly that the trans community is only gonna grow in America. And I feel like with this emergence of queer people of color communities in America, like if dyke spaces can't get down with that, they will disappear. Or unfortunately, they'll be forced to close their doors.
It seems like change is inevitable and potentially exciting, especially in a city like New York with a constantly evolving queer community. But how is our growing acceptance by society affecting lesbians at large?
How do you work to turn that tide?
We know right now that millennials in great numbers believe that there should be LGBT equality.
Danielle Moody Mills is an LGBT activist and cultural sociologist. I thought maybe she could give us insight into what acceptance means for the future of lesbian bars.
Has this come up for you at all, the idea of losing women's space or lesbian space?
It has come up because it's the idea of what happens when you start to fully integrate, right? Like that's what's happening with the LGBT community. Bars in different spots that were specifically for lesbians, specifically for the LGBT community, was because we weren't accepted anywhere else. So we were forced into creating a subculture where we could feel and find acceptance. But now that we're becoming more integrated into society, you can just walk into a bar down the street and there will be gay couples that are there. There will be lesbians there holding hands, kissing. You know, there's not this need necessarily to go to find that one spot where you can be yourself. But with integration also comes, you know, the downside of that. And it's almost mirroring. It's not exactly the same, so I don't want people to come for me, but it's almost mirroring what happened in the African American community with segregation. Segregation was good for Black business, but bad for Black people, right? And bad for this country. And so when Black and white people were finally starting to integrate, Black businesses died off. Because now Black people had other options and other places to go and spend their money. And I think that similarly with the LGBT community, that's what we're seeing as well.
I gather that an evolution is on the horizon. To be honest, this may be something we need in order to shift into a new chapter of our LGBTQ future, and we shouldn't be so scared of it.
I think that there are fewer and fewer individuals who identify as lesbian. There are more and more people who identify as queer, as trans, even bisexual. If you identify as queer, you're probably less likely to go into a lesbian-only bar. You're probably more likely to be comfortable in a mixed gay and lesbian space.
We still need to have places where we can talk about our commonness. Otherwise, we are doomed to repeat those past mistakes. Your generation will get to be 60 and still haven't figured out how we're going to make this work.
As queer women, we can go almost anywhere and feel accepted. So now that we're allowed to do all these things and, you know, feel more accepted, how do we appreciate what got us there?
The ways that we are men and women have changed so much. You know, not everybody identifies as a lesbian anymore. This is a beautiful thing. This is a magical moment in queer history in America.